Now that we've finished making our first 3D printable design, let's look at how we would send this to the 3D printer. So with Fusion 360, this is actually very simple. Long gone are the days where you have to install a separate plugin to export this as an STL and then open up your printing utility to bring it in. All you have to do is take a look at this icon over here where it says 3D print. So, or where it says make. Go ahead and click on it and you get this 3D print dialog box. So the first thing it's going to do is have us make a selection. So what is it we want to print? Well, I can just go ahead and choose my model. As far as refinement, I tend to leave mine at medium and it does fine. Make sure under your output that send to 3D print utility is selected. And here's a beautiful part. If you have any of these 3D printing software installed, it will actually go ahead and list them right out of the dialog box here. So you can choose which 3D printing utility you want to send this to. So I can go ahead and, let's say I want to send it to my MakerBot. I'm just going to click OK, and it basically takes care of the rest. It'll open up MakerBot and actually place my model right on the build plate. Now let's see how I'll just walk through how I would approach this as I'm printing. You may have experience with this particular software or you may not. But basically the first thing I would do is I would choose my device. So I'm going to go to device, select type of device. I have a few printers, but let's say I want to send it to Replicator 2. I'm going to make sure that's the one I have selected. Next I can position this simply by using these manipulators on the left side. If I want to place this maybe more to the front, I can do that, or move it to the sides. And every 3D printing utility will have this sort of options to allow you to position and rotate your objects. You know, in this case it positioned it perfectly. That's exactly how I want to print it. But let's say for example that it was positioned like this. Well, you obviously are not going to print it, you know, in that orientation, so you would want to go ahead and position it the way that it's actually going to be able to print correctly. So you can play around with those. What I actually like to do, especially with the MakerBot software, is I'll go to edit and just choose auto layout all, and that will end up usually doing a good job on selecting the best orientation to 3D print the specific item. So just make sure that, remember how a 3D printer works. It relies on the bottom layers to support the top. When we're talking about this type of technology, the fused filament fabrication. So just make sure, that it's positioned in a way that it's going to be able to print. Next, I'll briefly talk about my settings. I usually stick with 0.2 millimeters. You can go down to 0.1 or maybe 0.25 or 0.3. I usually try to print without a raft infill. I usually am about 20%, and in this case I'm using PLA, and my extruder temperature with MakerBot I usually do 230. Sometimes it's just a good idea to start with your defaults, and then work your way from that. So honestly, I tend to use most of the defaults. The only thing I will usually change is I usually don't print with a raft unless I need to, and maybe I'll play around either 10 to 20%, or if I'm printing something that's hollow, I'll leave this infill at 0. But as far as a guide to using the 3D printing utility, I just wanted to do a brief overview. This I can go into a whole lesson on how to use these, but you can find some good material either on that specific printing software's YouTube page or their website on exactly how to use all the different features. So next thing, I would just click OK, and then I would export this to my printer, and usually I would save it in an SD card. So you would select your SD card, give it a title, tweezers, and then I would click save. So that's basically it. Let's try this again, but we'll use a different software. Let's say, for example, I want to use Cura instead of my MakerBot software. Well, I'm just going to go ahead and choose Cura. Click OK. And it does the same thing. It'll go ahead, open up Cura for me, and it'll lay this right into the bed of the printer. In this case, I have a Ultimaker 2 Plus. And the same thing, we see the similar settings here where we can change, choose our nozzle diameter, our density, our infill, all our settings are here. So similar situation. The main point I want to show is how easy it is to go from Fusion 360 to your printing software to organize your model and send it right to the printer. Again, if you want to use the Ultimaker software, which is Cura, if you go on the Ultimaker website, again, they have some good videos showing you how to use their specific software. I'm going to go through one more option, and that's, let's say, if you just want to save this as an STL. Let's say your printer, for example, doesn't show on this list here, or you just want to save the model as an STL to upload it to a website or maybe send it to a friend to 3D print for you. Well, in that case, all you do is uncheck the Send to 3D Print utility, and you want to choose your model and click OK. And what that'll do is it'll open up this dialog box, and you're going to choose wherever you want to save it. So I'm just going to throw it on my desktop, give it a name, and notice that the file type is as an STL, so I can just click Save. Now I have an STL file, so I can open up the printing utility separate and go ahead and import it to there, or I can upload this to a website or do whatever I want with it. So that's basically it, and that's how you get your model ready for 3D printing. As you can see, very straightforward process with Fusion 360. They built it right into the software.